Elias Thorne stood straight and proud in his red uniform, his tall black bearskin hat casting a shadow across his face. As a royal guard stationed at Buckingham Palace, his job was to stand still, alert, and silent for hours, even with tourists waving, laughing, or trying to make him smile. He was used to discipline, he was used to rules, but deep inside Elias had a different dream, one that didn't involve marching or guarding gates. Ever since he was a boy, Elias had been fascinated with the sky. While other kids played football or watched cartoons, he sat on the rooftop with his father's old binoculars, following the jets that crossed the blue. The roar of engines, the speed, the mystery of flight, it filled his imagination like nothing else. He didn't just want to watch airplanes, he wanted to fly them. But in his world, dreams like that weren't easy. His family wasn't wealthy. His parents worked long hours just to keep food on the table. Becoming a pilot seemed impossible. So when he was old enough, Elias joined the Royal Guard to serve his country, earn a stable income, and support his family. Still, the dream of flying never left him. One evening, while on a break in the guard room, Elias overheard two officers talking about a joint pilot training program in North Wales. It was a special course for advanced military flight candidates. Only, the best and most promising were chosen. It included both British and international trainees and involved everything from flight theory to simulated combat drills. It was intense, elite, and nearly impossible to get into. But Elias believed in trying. He stayed up late that night writing his application. He had no flight experience, but he spoke from the heart. He wrote about discipline, focus, and his desire to grow beyond standing still. Weeks later, to his surprise, he was accepted for an observation period. It wasn't full admission, but it was a chance. That was enough for Elias. When he arrived at the camp, things were different. Completely different. Everyone there walked like they owned the sky. Their boots were muddy, their jackets open, and their conversations loud. Most had already flown gliders, small aircraft, or even helicopters. They talked about lift, yaw, and throttle like everyday words. Elias felt out of place. He was used to marching in silence and following strict orders. But this place was fast, competitive, and bold. The instructors wanted quick decisions, fast thinking, and confidence in chaos. Elias tried to keep up, but it didn't take long for others to notice how different he was. "Hey, Palace Guard," one cadet joked during a fitness drill, careful not to salute the sky. Laughter followed. Elias didn't respond. He just kept running, even when the mud slowed him down. In class, he listened carefully and took notes, but he hesitated during simulations. His movements were precise, but slow. While others reacted quickly in mock emergencies, Elias paused to double-check his steps. The instructors weren't impressed. "Flying isn't about perfect form," one of them told him. "It's about trusting your gut. You think too much." It wasn't meant as praise. A week passed, then two. Elias gave it everything. He woke up early, stayed up late, studied harder than anyone. But the difference in skill and confidence was clear. Others had grown up around planes. Elias had just dreamed of them. Then came the final day of his trial period. The commanding officer called him into his tent. "Elias, we admire your dedication," the man said, looking at his notes. "But this program requires quick adaptability and instinctive response. You're disciplined, no doubt, but we don't think you're cut out for this path. It's best to end your training here." Elias didn't argue. He stood, saluted, and walked out. As he packed his bag, he overheard a group of cadets outside. "Told you the guard wouldn't last. Guess he can go back to standing still now." They weren't whispering. Elias said nothing. He just zipped his bag and walked away from the camp. But as he left, something inside him shifted, not in anger, but in resolve. He realized something important. If he wanted to fly, really fly, it wouldn't be through shortcuts or perfect uniforms. He would have to build his own wings, one piece at a time. He didn't hate the camp for kicking him out. In fact, he was grateful. It had shown him what he didn't know. It had shown him how far he had to go. And more importantly, it showed him that wanting something badly isn't enough. You have to earn it, fight for it, and never let go of it, even when others laugh. As he stepped onto the train back to London, the sky above was filled with clouds. But he didn't look down. He stared up, eyes sharp with purpose. One day he promised himself he would fly, not because someone gave him permission, but because he made it happen. And when that day came, he knew exactly where he'd fly first. Elias Thorne sat quietly by the window on the train ride back to London. The soft hum of the engine and the steady movement of the train gave him time to think. The fields and hills rushed past, but in his mind, one thing stayed still: the memory of that moment when the commander told him he wasn't cut out to be a pilot. It wasn't just disappointment that filled his chest. It was a strange mix of sadness and determination. He had tasted the world of flying, even if only briefly, and he knew deep inside that he didn't want to let go. No matter what the others had said or how badly he had failed, the dream was still alive inside him. Back in London, Elias returned to his old life. Once again, he stood guard in front of royal gates with the same stillness and focus as before. Tourists came and went. Cameras flashed. But something had changed in his eyes. He wasn't just a soldier standing on duty anymore. He was a man, planning his second chance. Each shift was long and tiring, but during breaks, Elias pulled out a small notebook. He had started writing down everything he remembered from pilot camp: terms, instructions, diagrams. He even sketched the controls of fighter planes from memory. When others rested, Elias studied. When others talked, Elias listened. To aviation, podcasts through a tiny earpiece hidden under his hat. He knew he needed more than memory. He needed real training. But flight school was expensive, and he didn't have the kind of money that others at pilot camp had. So, he made a choice. He began working extra shifts. Some days, he barely slept. He took night duties, worked weekends, and even volunteered for special ceremonies just to earn a little more. After a few months, he had saved enough to take his first private flying lesson. The airfield was far from the city, but Elias didn't care. He took a long train, walked 2 miles on foot, and finally stood beside a small, white training plane. The instructor, an older man with kind eyes, looked him over. "You ever flown before?" the man asked. "No, sir," Elias replied, "but I've been dreaming of this my whole life." From the moment the plane left the ground, Elias knew he was where he belonged. Even though it wasn't a military jet, even though the flight was simple, his heart soared higher than the aircraft. Every small turn, every push of the throttle, it all felt natural to him. The instructor smiled during the flight. "You've got steady hands," he said. "That's rare." Elias didn't stop there. He enrolled in night classes to study aviation theory. He watched hours of online training videos. He downloaded free flight simulators and practiced for hours on an old laptop. And when that wasn't enough, he built his own cockpit setup using scrap parts and wires in his small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. He studied everything: engine systems, weather conditions, flight patterns, safety rules. Slowly, he began earning flight hours. The instructors noticed his focus and discipline. They didn't laugh at him. In fact, they admired how seriously he took each flight. Some nights, after a long day of guard duty, he would walk up to his building's rooftop and just stare at the stars. In the quiet of the night, he would remind himself why he was working so hard. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't trying to prove the others wrong. He just wanted to fly. He wanted to touch the sky with his own hands. 2 years passed this way. While others relaxed or gave up on dreams, Elias worked and learned and flew. It wasn't easy. There were days when money was tight. There were times he felt tired beyond words. But not once did he consider quitting. Then one day something unexpected happened. A friend from one of his aviation classes told him about a private defense contractor that was quietly running test flights on advanced aircraft. They were looking for fresh eyes, people with discipline, focus, and a clean record. Most of their pilots came from military backgrounds, but this program was a little different. It was more experimental, more open. Elias applied. He didn't expect to hear back. But he did. The company called him in for an interview. He wore his uniform, stood tall, and spoke with honesty. He told them about his failures and his journey. He didn't hide the fact that he had once been removed from a training camp. Instead, he explained what he had done since then. Every shift, every flight hour, every lesson. The panel listened carefully. They asked questions. They took notes. Then they thanked him and told him to wait for their decision. A week later, Elias received the call. "Mr. Thorne," the voice said, "we'd like to offer you a place in our simulator training program. If things go well, you'll move on to live aircraft trials." Elias didn't shout or cheer. He simply closed his eyes and smiled. It had taken years. It had taken every ounce of strength he had. But finally the door had opened again, not because someone gave him a chance out of pity, but because he had earned it. He walked back to Buckingham Palace for one of his final shifts. As he stood at his post, silent and still as always, a plane passed high overhead. No one else noticed, but Elias did. He followed it with his eyes just for a moment. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He was done standing still. The sky was waiting. Elias Thorne felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as he stepped into the sleek building of the private defense company. The place was quiet, clean, and filled with the low hum of machines and computers. Everywhere he looked, there were people in uniforms, engineers working on screens, and pilots preparing for their flights. It was a world far from the royal gates he guarded just months before. He was here for simulator training, a special program that used the most advanced flight simulators in the world. These simulators looked like real cockpits inside a room that could move, tilt, and shake to make the experience feel exactly like flying a jet. Elias had practiced on simple flight simulators at home, but nothing like this. The instructors gave him a quick introduction. "This is where we test your skills before you fly the real thing," one said. "You will face all kinds of challenges here. Weather, emergencies, even combat situations. We need pilots who stay calm and make the right decisions fast." Elias nodded, feeling a little pressure but ready to prove himself. The first few sessions were tough. The simulator threw unexpected problems at him: engine failures, sudden storms, even systems breaking down. At times, Elias felt overwhelmed. His hands shook, his heart raced. But he remembered what he had learned. Stay calm. Follow your training and trust yourself. After each session, the instructors gave feedback. "Good control, but you hesitate sometimes," one said. "Remember, quick thinking is key." Elias took their words seriously. He stayed late, practicing more, replaying the scenarios in his mind. He knew he had to improve not just his flying, but his confidence. The same hesitation that had made the pilot camp reject him before had to disappear. Weeks passed, and Elias grew stronger. His moves became quicker, his decisions sharper. The instructors started to smile more, nodding when he passed difficult tests. One day, after a particularly hard simulation where he had to land with multiple system failures, the lead instructor approached him. "Elias, you're ready for the next step," he said. "We're sending you to live flight tests." Elias's heart jumped. Flying the real jets. That was the dream he had chased for so long. But it also meant more risk, more pressure. He was no longer just a man dreaming of the sky. He was becoming a pilot. The days before the live flight tests were filled with briefings and physical training. Elias met other pilots who had years of experience, men and women who had flown combat missions or trained with the Air Force. They were polite but competitive. Some eyed Elias with curiosity, others with doubt. After all, he had started as a royal guard, not a pilot. Elias ignored the whispers. He knew his own journey, and that was enough. When the day finally arrived, Elias stepped into the cockpit of an F-35 stealth fighter, the most advanced aircraft in the world. The plane's surface was smooth and dark, designed to avoid radar. The controls inside were high-tech, with screens and buttons everywhere. It was a world apart from the simple training planes he had flown before. As the engine roared to life, Elias felt a rush of power and responsibility. He ran through his checklist carefully, remembering every lesson. The ground crew gave him a thumbs up, and the tower cleared him for takeoff. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky. Elias focused on every control, every sound. The flight was challenging. He had to navigate through simulated threats, avoid radar detection, and respond to emergencies. But the hours of study and simulator practice paid off. He stayed calm and in control. When he finally landed, the ground crew applauded quietly. Elias felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He was no longer the man who had been kicked out of pilot camp. He was a pilot. During the next weeks, Elias took part in more test flights. Each one was harder, pushing his skills and endurance. He learned how to handle the F-35's unique systems, how to manage fuel, and how to communicate with ground control under pressure. He also learned about teamwork. Flying such a complex aircraft wasn't a solo effort. He worked closely with engineers, technicians, and other pilots. Sometimes they trained together in group exercises, simulating real combat situations. Elias found himself earning respect not just for his skills, but for his humility and willingness to learn. One evening, after a long day of flight exercises, Elias sat in the mess hall with a few of his new colleagues. The conversation turned to stories of their past missions, battles they had flown, and close calls in the air. Elias listened quietly, then shared a little about his own journey, from Royal Guard to pilot trainee to test pilot. Some looked surprised. Others nodded with respect. Most people would have given up a long time ago, one pilot said. But you kept going. That's what makes a real pilot. Elias smiled but didn't say much. For him, it was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could reach the sky on his own terms. As weeks turned into months, Elias became more confident. He was no longer just flying the F-35, he was mastering it. The memories of being kicked out of the pilot camp felt far away. Instead, he focused on the future, on every flight, every challenge, every moment in the sky. Then came a surprise. One of the program directors called Elias into a private meeting. "We have a special assignment," the director said. "It's classified, but it's important. You'll be flying over the Welsh training grounds where you once trained, testing new landing procedures and emergency protocols." Elias's heart skipped a beat. The place where he had failed, where his dreams seemed to have ended, that was now part of his mission. It was a chance to face his past in a new way. He accepted without hesitation. As the day of the flight approached, Elias prepared carefully. He studied every map, every detail of the landing field. The weather was clear, but he knew that even small changes could affect the flight. When the moment came, Elias climbed into the cockpit with steady hands. The engine hummed beneath him as the plane lifted off smoothly. Flying over the hills and valleys of Wales, he felt a mix of emotions, pride, nervousness, and a quiet determination. Approaching the training field, Elias began the landing sequence. The F-35 responded perfectly. The wheels touched down gently on the grass strip. For a moment, everything was still. Elias looked around and saw the familiar landscape, the place that had once seemed so far away and impossible. But now it was his runway. The flight was a success. When he stepped out of the cockpit, the people at the camp watched in amazement. The man who had been kicked out was now flying the most advanced fighter jet and landing it safely on their own field. For Elias, this was more than a landing. It was proof that hard work, patience, and belief in oneself can change even the hardest stories. He knew the journey wasn't over. But this moment, this flight, was one he would never forget. The quiet morning air was filled with tension as Elias Thorne prepared for what would become one of the most important moments of his life. He was sitting inside the cockpit of the F-35 stealth fighter, a machine that looked like something from the future. Its sleek black body reflected the early sunlight as the ground crew finished their checks. Elias's hands moved over the controls with calm precision, but inside his heart beat faster than usual. Today's flight was a routine test, nothing unusual in theory. He was to fly over the training grounds in North Wales. the very place where years ago he had been told he didn't belong. The irony was not lost on him. This was his chance to prove, not just to others but to himself, that he had truly become a pilot. The plane's engine hummed to life. Elias adjusted his helmet and took a deep breath. The controllers gave him clearance, and with smooth power, the fighter jet lifted off the runway. The roar of the engine was powerful but controlled. As the plane climbed higher, Elias focused on every detail of the flight. Flying an F-35 was different from anything Elias had ever imagined. The technology was advanced beyond words: digital displays, automated systems, and controls that responded to the slightest touch. But despite all the power at his fingertips, the responsibility was enormous. One small mistake could change everything. As he approached the training field, the weather suddenly shifted. Dark clouds rolled in faster than expected. The sky grew heavy and the wind picked up. Elias's training kicked in immediately. He adjusted his speed and altitude, prepared for the unexpected. This was no longer just a test flight. It had become a real challenge. Suddenly, a warning light flashed on his dashboard. Engine pressure was dropping. Elias's mind raced as he recalled every emergency procedure he had drilled over and over. The engines could fail, but he had to stay calm. He radioed the control tower. "Mayday, mayday, engine alert, preparing for emergency landing." The calm voice from the tower replied, "Roger that, Elias. Land on the training field. We're clearing the area." Elias's hands worked quickly, switching systems, running checks, and guiding the plane toward the field below. The jet was heavy but responsive. He knew the landing strip well. It was narrow and surrounded by trees and hills. Precision was key. As he descended, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder. The plane rocked slightly in the gusts of wind. Elias kept his eyes steady on the instruments and the ground ahead. His muscles tightened, but his mind remained clear. The moment the wheels touched the grass, Elias felt a mix of relief and triumph. The landing was smooth, almost perfect considering the conditions. The engine sputtered and then died as the plane slowed to a stop. Elias sat still for a moment, catching his breath. The silence around the field was heavy. He unbuckled his harness and opened the canopy. Stepping out of the cockpit, he looked around. The training ground was empty, but Elias knew that in the distance, eyes were watching. The same eyes that had once judged him harshly now witnessed his success. He removed his helmet, his hair damp with rain. The cool air hit his face as he took a deep breath. For a long time, he just stood there, letting the moment sink in. The radio crackled behind him. "Excellent landing, Elias. You handled that perfectly under pressure." It was the voice of the base commander, a man Elias had met before but never truly spoken to. Now the tone held respect. Word spread quickly. By the time Elias walked back toward the camp, a small group had gathered near the edge of the field. Some faces looked surprised, others amazed. The very people who had doubted him now saw the pilot who had landed the advanced F-35 on their training ground, under difficult conditions. The base commander approached Elias with a firm handshake. "I want to apologize for how things were handled before," he said quietly. "You've shown courage and skill that can't be ignored. We were wrong." Elias nodded, accepting the apology without bitterness. He wasn't here to reopen old wounds. He was here to move forward. The officers asked him to share his experience with the trainees, explaining how to stay calm during emergencies and trust their training. Elias agreed. Standing before a group of young pilots, he told them not only about flying but about never giving up, even when the path seems impossible. That day marked a new chapter. Elias became more than just a pilot. He became a mentor, a symbol of perseverance. As weeks passed, Elias continued to fly missions and test flights, gaining even more skill and confidence. But the landing on that training field remained a defining moment, a moment when failure turned into triumph, when doubt turned into respect. Sometimes, late at night, Elias would think back to that rainy day. He realized that the sky had not only tested his flying skills, but also his spirit. The challenges, the fear and the hard work had shaped him into the pilot he had always dreamed of becoming, and he knew this was only the beginning. After that remarkable landing on the training field, Elias Thorne's life changed in ways he had never imagined. The man who had once been kicked out of the pilot camp was no longer just an outsider or a hopeful dreamer. He was now a respected pilot and a symbol of hard work and determination. Word about Elias's achievement spread quickly throughout the base and beyond. People who had doubted him or laughed at his dreams began to see him in a new light. He was invited to speak at meetings, to share his story with new recruits, and to take part in important flight missions. His journey became a lesson for many, that with patience, focus, and courage, even the toughest obstacles can be overcome. But Elias never forgot where he came from. He remembered the feeling of being left out, the sting of rejection, and the long nights spent studying alone. These memories became the foundation of his new role, not just as a pilot but as a mentor. He made it his mission to help others who were struggling or feeling like they didn't belong. When young trainees doubted themselves, Elias was there to encourage them. When someone failed a test or faced criticism, Elias shared his own story of failure and recovery. He wanted to show them that failure was not the end, but a step on the path to success. One afternoon, Elias was asked to lead a special training session. The room was filled with cadets who looked nervous and uncertain, much like he had years ago. Standing before them, Elias spoke with honesty and warmth. "I know what it feels like to be told you're not good enough," he said. "I know the pain of watching others pass by while you struggle. But I also know this: if you keep working, if you keep believing, you can surprise even yourself." The room was silent, listening carefully. Some faces showed hope, others relief. For many, Elias was the proof they needed that dreams could come true, even against the odds. Outside of training, Elias's life was busier than ever. He continued to fly missions, sometimes testing new aircraft, sometimes helping with research and development. Each flight brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to learn and grow. His skills sharpened with every hour in the sky. Despite the success, Elias remained humble. He remembered his days as a Royal Guard, standing silently on cold mornings, and he kept that discipline close. To him, flying was not about glory or recognition. It was about responsibility. The responsibility to protect, to lead, and to inspire. One day, during a ceremony at the base, Elias was honored for his achievements. The commander praised his courage and dedication, and the crowd applauded loudly. Elias looked out at the faces of his fellow pilots and trainees and felt a deep sense of gratitude. But the greatest reward, he knew, was the chance to keep flying, to keep pushing limits, and to keep inspiring others to do the same. Later, Elias found a quiet moment on the rooftop of the base. The sky stretched endlessly above him, blue, vast, and full of promise. He thought about his journey, from the young boy watching jets on the rooftop in London, to the Royal Guard standing still, to the man who had landed an F-35 in a place where he was once rejected. The dream had changed him. It had taught him patience, strength, and humility, and it had shown him that true success is not about where you start, but how far you're willing to go. Elias smiled, feeling the cool breeze on his face. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. But now, he was ready. The sky was no longer a distant dream. It was his home, and he was flying higher than ever before.